It's my distinct pleasure to introduce our guest of honor, Margaret Malloy. Margaret is Global Chief Marketing Officer at Siegel and Gale, the preeminent branding company based in New York. And now I believe you're in several other capitals around the world as well. Siegel and Gale works with the world's leading companies to define, design, and deliver brand experiences. And Margaret Malloy is not only a global CMO, but she's also been recognized as 2020 Marketing Society Fellow for her contributions to the global marketing community. In 2017, the Drum awarded her as B2B Marketer of the Year. She's been described by the Irish Times as an unofficial ambassador of Ireland. And as you'll find out today, there's so many more interesting things to learn about her and what she has to share. She is a popular CMO panel moderator, and you can listen to her podcast, How CMOs Commit, by going onto the Siegel and Gale website. And I think we may also probably link to that as well if you check back with us. She's the creator of a LinkedIn newsletter of the same name, sharing insights from 90 CMOs around the world. And she has been recognized as one of the most influential CMOs by Twitter. She's been published in Forbes, Harvard Business Review, and many, many other sources. She's a native of Ireland, a resident of Manhattan, and the creator of Wearing Irish, which I hope that we'll get to hear a little bit more about. She is also, in the past, she's also held leadership roles at Gerson Lerman Group, Siebel Systems, and Ironcorn, and she earned her MBA at Harvard Business School, her undergraduate degree from the University of Ulster, as well as La Universidad de Valladolid in Spain. So with that, let's welcome Margaret Malloy. So Margaret, say hello to our audience.
Hello, Young Me, and thank you for that very generous and comprehensive introduction. What a treat, such a joy to be with you and your membership in this exciting month of January and New Year. I do applaud you for the series. The premise is so sound, and I think it's a tremendous time for marketers to have a leadership seat, and also, of course, for women to take leadership seats. So this is the intersection of many of my favorite topics.
Great, great. So to start, let's start at the very beginning and just with a broad brush overview. I understand that you grew up on, this is very unusual, you grew up on a dairy farm in Ireland. Can you tell us something about what it was like and how being on that farm contributed to who you are today?
Oh my, we really are going back. Yes, I grew up the eldest of 6 children on a very modest farm in Ireland, the middle of the country, a very far cry from Manhattan, where I call home today. But some of the principles I learned there have stood with me, as sure of all of us in terms of our formative experiences. I learned tremendous respect for hard work. I learned to see, particularly in my parents, the beauty and power of sacrifice. And I also learned about the importance of community. In that context, in a rural environment, you live by the support of your neighbors. So those principles have stood with me throughout. Most of all, as it pertains to my career as a marketer, I learned about the importance of reputation. And I think a story my father told us often as a child growing up, he didn't have the benefit of a formal education. He left school in probably 6th grade. But the headmaster in his school, a gentleman by the name of Master Cox, would always tell the young people not to have graffiti on the desks, but rather be remembered by your deeds. And of course, that has very much stood to me, because today I think a lot about reputation professionally in the brands that we work with at Siegel and Gale, but also personally.
Very, very well said. So tell us a little bit about how you got from the dairy farm to global CMO of Siegel and Gill. How did that path work out?
So I identify very much as an immigrant, first generation high school graduate, college graduate, etc. And in that context, education is the first part of the pathway. So I was a very good student. I was very fortunate. As I said, my parents made the kind of sacrifices that gave me those opportunities. And I began my career with quite a significant conviction that marketing was that path for me. That balance of storytelling and analysis really spoke to my skill set. So went to college, did a business degree, came straight away to the United States, representing the Irish government with an Irish agency, Enterprise Ireland, went on to do various roles representing the country of Ireland, and then went to business school. After business school, with the benefit of, if you will, an American credential, I went to work for various American tech companies. Mm-hmm. And through that career, the thread that goes through it is that passion for marketing and a desire to do tours of duty in different marketing functions. So from PR to product marketing to where I find myself today, leading brand at one of the world's leading agencies.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, so now let's transition and talk a little bit about the world of marketing. We've just come out of an unusually eventful year that has been pivotal in many ways. And it's a year that's sure to go down in the history books for a lot of reasons. What do you think of this past year and its implications for marketers? What should we be thinking about?
Wow, that's a very big question, Young Mi. I would highlight a few points and refer all of your members to the House CMOs Commit podcast, mm-hmm. where I've interviewed over the course of the period 90 CMOs. I've had the privilege to talk to those CMOs, brand side executives, about their experience. And in some ways, that series is essentially a documentary in that it documents the decisions CMOs made during the period. Mm-hmm. I think right now we're in a transition year. I see 2021 as a transition year. We're going from the heartache and the hardship and the learnings of last year to go to whatever we deem to be the next normal. And a number of dimensions to last year that I thought were really interesting include a renewed focus on empathy from a brand standpoint, empathy from a leadership and management standpoint. Empathy took center stage. Also a recognition as marketers that brands need to have a compelling purpose, a reason for being that's more than economic reward. Yeah. The corollary of that, of course, is the notion of stakeholder capitalism, beyond thinking merely in the context of shareholders, but rather what purpose is the company serving to its employees, to the community at large. And that enhanced awareness, I think, has tremendous implications for marketers and makes it an exciting time. One of the most important implications is brands now have both permission and an obligation to step up in society and play a larger role. And that's very, very exciting. And it'll be very interesting to follow because many consumers and people in general have lost trust in other institutions, and businesses are on top of that scale in terms of the entities that have trust. And trust is something you don't waste. So what brands do with that trust is tremendously exciting.
I couldn't agree with you more. And in this context, in this context of all the transitions and the opportunity to really shape the future, you don't have to name names because I know that you're a B2B company and your clients may not feel so comfortable you speaking about them, or even brands that are not clients. But if you could speak about the examples of brands, maybe some things that a couple of brands have done well in that context and maybe not so well, so that we can learn from that.
Certainly. And I think for the most part, brands stepped up to the challenge. Mm-hmm. I look at it in a variety of categories. There are brands that first and foremost focused on their employees. I look at Target, for example. Early during COVID, there was an emphasis on bonuses and looking after their workers. Then there were brands that retooled their operations to serve the community. So many are well documented, like General Motors, changing their processes to create ventilators. Mm-hmm. Then there are brands that looked to inspire us. So Diageo, for example, early in the COVID period, in the lockdown here, they recreated their ad campaign. So for their brand Guinness. Guinness has a very important day on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. And recognizing that people wouldn't be celebrating in person, they create a wonderfully inspiring campaign entitled We Will March Again. So it's from retooling to focusing on employees to inspiring and also collaborating. A number of brands formed highly unexpected collaborations. So I look at Amex, for example, and Hilton Hotels, who collaborated to make the space available at the hotels for frontline workers. And the thread that goes through all of these brands that I believe stepped up extraordinarily well is they ask themselves an important question. How can we be useful? Mm-hmm. And leaned on their purpose to execute on that. Now, in terms of missteps, to the extent there were missteps, I think they came from a different place. They came from brands trying to be opportunistic, and that did not serve them well, or people being simply tone deaf and not being able to read the context in which people were living their lives. And thankfully, there are fewer examples of those. Perhaps the most relevant one is a major technology company that launched a premium product early in COVID when their neighbors were really struggling with their livelihoods and their lives.
Mm-hmm. So very, very interesting. And in this context, you spoke about the brands, but what about the marketers working in those brands in this new context? Because marketing is undergoing transformation it's been going on for quite a while now. So what kinds of skills from the past should they continue, and what kind of new skills should they be cultivating?
It's a beautiful question, and it's evolving, the answer. I'll focus on the skills they need to continue to develop with the renewed emphasis on stakeholder capitalism, the ability to ask the right questions, to understand the customer journey and all their stakeholders' experience with the brand. So that's the intersection of research and asking smart questions and synthesizing and doing the data analysis. That skill is core. Another skill that's vitally important is storytelling, because it's through stories often that we inspire people. So that skill took on new importance in this period. A third component I will highlight is agility, the ability to respond quickly and with confidence is something that's not going away. And the one thing that hasn't been talked about, I think, enough is what new skills do marketers need in an environment when they're working from home? So those skills to me include communication, but a much more robust toolkit around communication. How do you read the room when all you can see is a rectangle or a series of rectangles? Different skill set. How do you project your point of view when that's the only real estate you have? So communications when working from home is important. And finally, I would emphasize the skill around being thoughtful about the rituals. And this is perhaps more a leadership skill than an individual contributor one. But what are the rituals that companies need to create to maintain and grow culture in an environment when we are not in person? Because many of the rituals, the colloquial water cooler talk, or the seeing someone and stopping by their desks, since those behaviors have gone away, how do we create culture? How do we create new rituals? That feels really important to those of us who are in leadership roles.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Can I ask you to give a couple of personal examples on that? And, one thing that I'd like to share with the audience, you have a wonderful quote about communication. I couldn't agree with you more about how important it is. You've said that communication is a contact sport. And you mentioned now that we're in this virtual environment where we're missing that kind of contact. If you could talk about a couple of examples that have worked for you. I know we're still figuring things out, and so there's more room to innovate, but please share some tips as well as about the rituals aspect as well. I think those are very, very important.
So on communications, I may surprise you, young me, when I emphasize writing. Because, and I'll tell you why. Writing, good, clear writing manifests good, clear thinking. And that ability to be clear when we miss the visual cues that are present in person is really important. So I think an emphasis that I've placed in my team is real clarity around the brief. So every assignment, every initiative that we embrace, it's what are we trying to accomplish? What will success look like? What are the roles and responsibilities? So writing's really important. Another surprise, I found emojis quite helpful in this era. And I was a little resistant to emojis because I tend to be a little formal. But one of the benefits of emojis is they help project tone. Again, when you're not in person, tone is really hard to discern. So I've actually upped my use of emojis and I'm learning in the process. A third thing, in addition to the writing and the communicating, it's the listening. Really trying to listen for what's not being said. The messages that are gone unsaid, and that's really challenging. It matters in your management, in your teams, but it also matters, of course, when you're talking to clients as well. Trying to understand not just what someone said, but what were they trying to convey. So those are important dimensions of communications. Arguably, they've always been important, but in this setting of working from home, they're heightened in value. In terms of rituals, I believe every company needs to do an exercise of saying the following. What are the rituals we had when we were in person that continue to serve us well? What are the rituals that we need to sunset that no longer serve our purposes? And frankly, what are the new rituals we need to create? And important opportunity that presents to make sure now that, if you will, the vase is broken, how do we rebuild it in a way that's inclusive and that a way that gives everyone voice and achieves the objectives as well? So rituals can include the classic stand-up daily meeting where we're getting to clarity on what we're going to do functionally. Or it can be, how do you have a birthday celebration? Very classic ritual, but it can be more important than that. How do we conduct meetings? How do we start a meeting? How do we end a meeting? Do we need to spend a little more time at the beginning of the meeting asking people how they're doing, as opposed to getting to the task at hand, because the context is more complex?
So two things that I'd like to dig a little bit deeper in, if you will, because I think this is so important for all of us. First, in a virtual environment, do you have any tips about how we can better pick up those cues, those subtle cues of the unspoken, and so that we can read the room better? And what have you done in terms of rituals before the meeting to warm things up? If you can give us one or two examples from your personal experience.
I think the first thing is we have to recognize and respect people's boundaries. So there is almost an unstated rule and everyone switches on their camera, and I love that too. But there are moments when people don't want that, and we want to give people that permission and the comfort. One of the great things about working from home and working in Zoom for meetings is there's much more democracy, because we all are that rectangle on the screen. It's not who's sitting next to whom or who's close to the whiteboard and gets to take the notes. So that, in a strange way, creates an egalitarian context that may not have existed before. So how do we leverage that? We make sure that we use the chat and those other features because not everyone is comfortable in speaking up. We make sure that we ask people. Often it's about asking people. One of the things we've begun doing in our team is when we come up with an idea, how do you give people constructive feedback without being negative? One of the tools I've started using is asking people about any initiative, be it one we've done in the past. What did you like about it? And what did you wish for? What was your wish? So what do you like, what you wish? Wish, of course, is an elegant way of providing constructive feedback. What do you wish we would have done differently? Or what do you like, what do you wish? I think that's a really useful device for meetings in general, but particularly right now in COVID, and getting everyone's voice in the room in the beginning. So simple questions like you did in this meeting, where are you joining from? Getting the people's voice in illuminates the room, it contributes energy to the room, but suddenly that next sentence is easier if the voice is in early in the conversation. And then giving team members ownership. Some team members love taking the notes. Some love being the folks who are creating the icebreakers, letting people step up. And it's been extraordinary looking at people who in this setting have really demonstrated leadership. And as a manager, it's a joy to see that.
Wonderful, wonderful. I am wonderful theme of democracy throughout your entire response about how you're bringing everybody into engagement that way. So I just want to mention to the audience, we will be taking audience questions in the later part of this interview. So please, if something sparks your interest, please type it in the chat. I'll look through the questions. I noticed that somebody's already sent in a question. You can wait until later because we want to catch everything that Margaret is speaking about, but you don't have to wait. So just wanted to mention that. And Margaret, earlier you mentioned about being an immigrant to this country. And I think that's very interesting because it gives you a unique perspective that in some ways, many people don't have. So if you could talk a little bit more about that perspective and why it's valuable for a marketer, because it's something probably marketers can cultivate. So please share with us a little bit about that.
I think being an immigrant gives you an outsider perspective that's very healthy. It challenges you to check your assumptions and ask really good questions. As an immigrant, you are essentially in a foreign land. So you know that your previous experience will limit your success in that context. So that's what forces the questioning. It also opens your eyes to the potential of others, seeing potential, because perhaps in my case, you've had opportunity. And it also challenges you not to conflate someone's intelligence with their education or their experience, meaning just because they've had access or not doesn't determine someone's potential. So these sort of characteristics, and most important of all, I think, the notion of never being entitled. You have to earn your, to use your language, your seat at the table, and recognize that privilege that comes with that. So all of those qualities contribute, I hope, to making a better marketer, because understanding the customer, asking questions, never assuming you have the right to their dollars or their business, or that it's something you own, but knowing you have to earn it all the time. Those are good qualities, I believe, for marketers. And at a macro level, having an outsider perspective is really healthy, because we can all get caught up in our assumptions and what we believe to be true. And bringing that freshness all the time can only be good.
Yeah, no, I love that answer. I always go back to that old parable about the blind man and the elephant. At any one point in time, we're only touching one piece of the elephant. But as an immigrant, you're more aware of that because you've seen different perspectives. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I think that's right, Youngmi. And I think it also invites you to consider what is universal.
Mhm.
So sometimes as an immigrant, you are focused on what's different about you.
Mhm.
But in actuality, what I've learned as an immigrant to America is what connects us is often larger than what separates us. So that mindset of what do we have in common as a point of departure and identifying the universal, but yet celebrating what sets us apart, but acknowledging also what connects us and the shared values that we all have and shared humanity.
Absolutely, absolutely. Words of wisdom that more people need to hear these days. I mean, we need to amplify it. I think everybody will agree with it, but we need to amplify it. Thank you, Margaret. And now, another one of the aspects of Margaret Malloy that I find extremely remarkable is your networking prowess. I think you are possibly the best networker in the world. I wouldn't be surprised if you knew more CMOs and other C-suite executives than anybody else on earth. But the reason that I call you the world's best networker is not just the size of your network, because numbers are not that meaningful, but it's the way that you go about networking that's so remarkable. Because you're networking not to expand your network only and to promote your business, but really to connect people with each other.
I think a starting point for me is deep curiosity about people. So when I think about networking, it's really comes from a place of understanding and desirous of understanding what makes people tick. That's the first thing. Second thing is following up. So many people we meet don't follow up. The third component is personalization. We've all been in receipt of that sort of copy and paste LinkedIn request, or worse yet, just hitting the LinkedIn button with no personalization. So those are important tenets for me. The other dimension that's worth noting is being really intentional about it. So I dedicate time every week in my calendar to connecting people I know in my network to each other, people who could benefit from knowing each other. And over time and over the years, that tends to compound itself in terms of network. In the last few years, however, I've had an important shift in my philosophy around networking. And it's been around making sure I have a diverse network. Earlier on, I would look at my network and I could sort of ascribe my populations to different groups. They were alums of Harvard Business School. They were Irish people in America. They were senior marketers. But I was missing a lot. I was missing diversity on so many dimensions, notably cognitive diversity. So I intentionally went out and sought to meet people from different backgrounds and different points of departure. And of course, ethnic diversity, racial diversity, all of these dimensions. And what's been remarkable over the past year, suddenly there's a lot more, appropriately so, emphasis on that conversation. And now the relationships that I built in the last 5 years have actually become more relevant because it's an effort that I've essentially cultivated during the lead up to any sort of need to call on your network. So I personally don't love the word networking. It seems very transactional. To me, I think more about connecting. And it sounds quite obvious, but it's always from a place of what can I give? And then reciprocity follows. So it's very authentic, but it's also very intentional, as I mentioned, in the follow-up and leveraging systems to do it at scale.
There's another notable skill that you have that I see in too few of our leaders. Some leaders do have it, but many don't, or perhaps it's something that we can all cultivate more, especially among women and underrepresented minorities. You have this executive presence that is very resonant, and it's quite distinctive. You're always intentional. You always know you're not pushing it, but you always have a direction that you're gently guiding us towards, and it's never overbearing. And so it's flexible, it's extremely generous. You promote involvement of everybody. And so could you talk about how you cultivated your presence and what others can do to cultivate their own?
Oh, thank you. It's very generous observation. I sincerely believe it's always a work in progress, and I definitely consider myself a work in progress. I think the generalizable skills that others may benefit from is working hard on your communication. Speaking skills, I touched on writing skills earlier, because one of the challenges, particularly women and underrepresented minorities experience, is the need to be heard and the confidence to be represented, but also to have your point of view heard. So being intentional about learning speaking skills is a very practical way to do that, because that in turn gives you the confidence. Another component is being really respectful of people's time. And that speaks to my intentionality. So very often I'm hosting a meeting with potentially a large audience or an event. So I recognize people are spending a couple of hours with me. I really want to give value. So that's about the streamlining of the processes. It's around being clear on what we're here to achieve and really doing the homework in advance, knowing your audience and making sure they have a good experience. A third thing is really being wildly aware of your reputation. And when you think about your actions and your communications as being your legacy and part of your reputation, that will help you be motivated to do the homework. So that certainly helped me. Look, I'm that girl who did her homework in school. That's who I am. It's part of my heritage. So that contributes to it. And when you've done your homework, you feel prepared. And that's a huge part of it. And what I'm to the work in progress, young me, what I need to work on going forward is prioritization. I need to get better at saying no so I can be truly present when I am present.
Well, I think that you must do that extremely well because you're juggling so many balls. But let me ask you, segueing off of your response to that, can you give us a word of advice that you might give another woman who is aspiring to a leadership role?
Dream big. Have big ambitions. Give yourself permission to dream big. You know, frankly, on reflection, I could have done a little more of that. Another, another recommendation to consider is build a board of directors among your peers and among your colleagues and membership of organizations like this that will serve you as a sounding board. In my generation, honestly, when we were beginning our careers, we didn't have the same level of conversation or mentorship. We didn't have the same transparency with our peers around our salaries, around our benefits. And as a result, you were making assumptions. So I would counsel women, be peers to each other, be transparent, ask questions of your peers so that you have data which gives you power in any conversation of leadership.
Great, great. And I want to get to audience questions, but I'd like to ask a couple more questions that are a little bit more personal in nature because I'm sure everybody wants to know so much more about you. The first, you're an avid supporter of Irish fashion. So can you tell us a little bit about that and what makes Irish fashion unique?
So you can check this out on wearingirish.com or Wearing Irish on Instagram. Very briefly, a few years ago, I realized that I could contribute in a very practical way to helping the country of Ireland in my position as someone who convenes a lot of people in America and who has a certain level of access and exposure. So I settled on helping designers. I created this movement called Wearing Irish, and the premise of it was to tell the untold story of Irish fashion. Ireland has world-class designers, yet very few people, including people of Irish heritage, could name an Irish fashion designer. So I set out to change that. And one of the initiatives I'm most proud of was a competition 2 years ago where we identified 10 Irish designers, took them to New York, hosted an event for 3 days, invited many people from many of my diverse networks to meet the designers. And it was a joy to introduce them. And I think they benefit tremendously, not least from the learnings. And it's an ongoing story. So I've begun the first chapter and others are building on that. And I hope to see more Irish designer gaining prominence.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And Margaret, you're also a mom of 2 sons. And I've heard through the grapevine that you are remarkably active in their upbringing. I also heard one of your sons, Emmett, participate in your CMO's podcast. And I was absolutely blown away. He's like a mini Margaret. So tell us, give us a couple of your parenting tips and tell us how you're able to juggle. You said earlier that you need to get better at prioritization. I'm not so sure. You seem to be juggling all of these aspects of your life so beautifully. So please share some of your wisdom.
Yes, I'm a parent of 2 teenagers, so you can only imagine the challenges and joys that affords me. I don't know that I've figured out parenting. That's definitely a learning on the job endeavor. I have, however, funnily enough, leaned heavily on values and that the old traditions or the values that my parents passed along to me. I also have tremendous respect for teachers and educators, and I'm very committed to being a partner with the schools where my children have the privilege of attending. So that's part of it. Also, it's funny, isn't it? It's one of the most important jobs we do, but one of the jobs we have the privilege of doing with the least education, at least in my experience. So I've learned by mistakes. I'll tell you 2 quick stories. My eldest son, Finn, he is anaphylactic with severe food allergies. And I discovered that through giving him white fish as a parent of 14 months. So we had a frankly near-death experience with my eldest son. So that was a very eye-opening experience. And I share that with other parents around the importance of being aware of food allergies. Just this past year, young me, Emmett, whom you've met, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes during COVID. So, and thankfully he's doing very well. But the parenting lesson here is that you have to obviously be active in parenting, but sort of go with the flow, because parenting is one of these things we're never prepared for. But my emphasis is around the values. And really the core for us as a family is around work ethic and respecting the dignity of other people. And this whole idea of reputation. You don't get much airtime with my children, so I don't get to make many points. So those are the ones that I try to prioritize.
I see some of the parents in the audience vigorously nodding their heads. And so thank you for that. And then maybe just one final quick question. Are you somebody who makes resolutions? And if you are, can you share any that you made, both from professional and a personal perspective? And then I promise I'll get to audience questions.
So funny enough, last year, my resolution was to do more video. I'd been given opportunity to broadcast rights on LinkedIn and I hadn't used them. Funny how that worked out. And now we're doing a lot of video. I'm not particularly resolution oriented, but the framework I think about is stop, start, continue. So what am I going to stop doing, start doing, and continue doing this year? Continue is really building community in the CMO community, in the marketing community, and with my team at work. I'm going to try to stop saying yes to everything. So that speaks to the prioritization. And I'm going to start, wait for this, I'm going to start cooking. So you've been very generous in listing some of my accomplishments, but there are many developmental opportunities I have too. And that window, that experience with my son's diagnosis, the type 1 diabetes, has really opened my awareness around nutrition. So a little bit of personal and professional blended in together.
Oh, very, very nice. All right. So I'm going to draw from audience questions, but since I had this unfortunate technical glitch, I lost all the questions that were put in the chat before. So I'm going to reach out to Esther. Esther is our wonderful events chair. Esther, if you could go through the prior questions, and either you can ask the questions or you can send them to me in the chat. But I do have a question from Patty Koss. She'd like to know, what is the best way to find a good and relevant mentor in a leadership position so that the interactions are mutually beneficial? I love that, Patty Koss. You're already thinking about giving back and not only learning from your mentor. So Margaret, what would you say to that?
I would say, think in terms of a board of directors and not a single mentor. So expand your thinking because it's a lot of pressure to the selection of one mentor, and there may be a lot of time commitment there. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, don't neglect your peers. Peers can play a significant role in mentoring. One of the mistakes I see people making is in selecting a mentor, they almost reach too high and the person is too far along in their career to be truly helpful. And the third thing is, it's very flattering to be asked to be a mentor. People like to be asked. Maybe the opportunity for Patty and others is you need to drive the bus though. You need to schedule the time and don't ask for too much. 10 minutes conversations every month, but don't neglect to follow up.
Beautiful, beautiful. A couple of people would like to have a little bit more information about comments that you made earlier. And one is, somebody asked, and unfortunately, because these are being copied and pasted to me, I don't know who the asker was, but it's a great question. She or he would like an example of a ritual that you sunsetted during this COVID period.
So it'll be very specific to every organization, of course. We used to do happy hours in person on Friday afternoons, and we sunsetted that because, frankly, our observation is people wanted to get a little bit more of the time back for themselves. And we've shifted to doing what we did in person. We had Bagel Fridays. Every Friday, people brought bagels, to Bagel Fridays online.
Very good, very good. So everybody's chomping together. So that didn't work so well online. Yeah.
I think the bagels online opportunity was interesting because now we're in a creative field. I'm at an agency. So people were sharing photos of their bagels.
Oh, very nice, very nice. So the new way that you're sharing was working.
Yes.
The old way would not have worked. Okay, sorry. I'm trying to multitask here, and as you can see, I'm not so good at this. All right, so another question about this unusual period that we are experiencing. Somebody would like to know if you have an example of a company that led with empathy. And this is raising the company up. So in this case, if you're comfortable, I think it'd be great to name names.
Oh, many, many examples. And I would refer everyone again to How CMOs Commit podcast and the newsletter. We had an episode specifically on empathy. A good example is CVS Health. CVS has a brand purpose which is helping people on a path to better health.
Mm-hmm.
And they manifest their empathy in cultivating a partnership with Abbott for the testing and the state of Rhode Island and the state of Georgia. And they recognized that a lot of people were in need of testing,
Mm-hmm.
and essentially created a program around that. So that's one example, but very, very many on the series.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent. And your remarkable leadership abilities really resonated with this audience. And one of our audience members would like to know, what are your top 3 favorite leadership books that you think everybody should read?
Essentialism. I'll focus on one, and I'll be thoughtful about the others. But Essentialism is a good one. It's a new book, relatively new book, and what it speaks to my desire to simplify right now and to prioritize, and forcing yourself to ask the question: how do I simplify? What is essential? And another book I'd emphasize is How to Disrupt Yourself by Whitney Johnson. Whitney is a coach, a wonderful author, and early in her career, an analyst. And she challenges us all to not be too comfortable in our space and how to make sure we're continually evolving as learners. So those are 2 that I would prioritize.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for sharing those. This is an interesting question. What strategies, because I'm sure that we've all been in this situation, what strategies have you found successful in helping your teammates challenge their assumptions and focus on shared values? Sometimes it's hard to get to that common perspective, right?
Yeah, I would re-emphasize the like and the wish framework. What do you like about something, and what do you wish it were, or what's your wish for something? That's very helpful. It's really about empowering people to ask questions. And what I tend to say is the greatest gift you can give someone is to ask them a question. A follow-on gift is to listen to the answer and act on it. But to me, and that's why I enjoy more often than not your role, young me versus mine, in moderating, because I think asking a question is a tremendous gift. So empowering people, encouraging people, giving people permission to ask questions is truly a great way to get to what's universal.
I have to tell the audience, this is extremely intimidating to be the person asking questions of Margaret Malloy, because nobody does it better. You have to see her give an interview. It is a work of art. So I think that's a brilliant answer. And I'd like to add to that is the person who asks the questions controls the conversation. So Margaret, you're a master of that. So yeah, I see you nodding your head. Yeah. Let's see, a couple of people want to know about women working in male-dominated industries, how to break the glass ceiling.
Wow, that's a big question. I've always worked in male-dominated industries. I've worked in technology, and now, funnily enough, there are plenty of male in the creative industry.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of it is just a combination of competence. So first and foremost, you need to be competent.
Mm-hmm.
Know your craft, hone that craft, and be an expert, because that will give you the confidence to then assert your point of view. So there's that balance of competence, confidence, and communicating your value. The other component, is forming partnerships with other women, elevating each other, representing each other, vowing to represent each other.
Mm-hmm.
And the third is, I've been very fortunate to have often worked with men who champion gender, who champion women, and expressing gratitude to those men, but also educating them on what they need to do, that it's not enough just to hire great women. You have to see how they're being promoted. It's not enough to invite the woman to the meeting. You have to monitor airtime. Yes. how much of the airtime is she getting? So we are at this transition period where we have opportunity, but also as women, a certain burden to educate. And that's a workload we need to embrace. It helps us and it helps our peers.
Thank you. Thank you for that really wise and I 100% agree with your response. Now we are at the top of the hour, and unfortunately, there's so many things that I personally would love to know about Margaret, and there's so much more to learn from her. So I encourage everybody in this audience to go to her podcast, go to her LinkedIn, read everything that she's doing, because there's a lot of wisdom and our theme song, Brilliance in Marketing there. So Margaret, thank you so much for sharing this hour with us. It's been a wonderful conversation. And thank you everybody in the audience for your attention, participation, and great questions. See you again. And don't forget our upcoming events. Go to amanewyork.org. See you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.